Gator, the Strange Man in the Woods. Written and performed by Tony Capobianco. Growing up as a kid in the late 80s and early 90s was magical. In many ways, we all shared the same childhood, but from the vantage point of our individual homes. Times were different then. Our parents allowed and even encouraged us to go outside, unsupervised with our friends, to play and to explore. The internet had not yet reached our daily lives and fundamentally changed society. There were no mobile phones to chain us to their tiny screens. Things like FaceTime and Skype didn't exist. If we wanted to talk to a friend, we would either pick up the phone and call them, or we'd go to their house to see them. In other words, if we wanted FaceTime with a friend, we would make it happen without the barrier of a little screen held in our hands. Things were less artificial back then, and we crafted strong childhood friendships through the sharing of common experiences in the real world. Experiencing and exploring this fascinating and wondrous world together was beautiful. It was a time of magic and wonder. The thing about magic, though, is that it can be light or dark. Always soak up the light, but beware of the dark. My two best friends and I had been playing wiffle ball in the park. Well, it wasn't so much a real park as it was a patch of grass that was perfect for games of home run derby. The park, well shaded from the fiery sun, was right on the edge of the woods. We would often bat as our favorite baseball players. I chose to play as Don Mattingly, while Pasquale and Raul played as Jose Canseco and Mark McGuire. Pasquale threw a pitch and I violently swung and missed. Pasquale jokingly quipped, "Tommy, you swung at that like you just filled your pants with explosive diarrhea." Laughing, I replied, "Did you know that the runs are hereditary?" Raising his eyebrows, Pasquale responded, "Nope." In a serious voice, I said, "Yeah, it runs in the genes." The three of us laughed as only 10-year-olds can. The laughter soon ceased. We saw a strange man watching us from behind a tree at the edge of the woods. The man stood in such a way that the tree hid most of his body from our view. Only his upper chest, neck, and head were visible. The stranger looked to be around our parents' age. He was wearing a weird hat, and the look in his eyes was unsettling. Though it was a brutally hot day, a cold chill went down my spine when I saw him. It was creepy. Why was a grown man lurking behind a tree watching little kids play? It was the summer of 1989. What might have otherwise been a whimsical summer break became the kind of nightmare that you only read about happening to other people. That particular summer was unusually hot and humid. Summers in New York's Hudson Valley were typically fairly mild. Most days, the temperatures ranged from the 80s to low 90s, but that summer was different. Several sweltering heatwaves oppressed us, with days of temperatures in the mid to upper 90s. Wanting to play outside, but not wanting to roast, we sought out adventures in the nearby woods to find some comfort in the shade of the trees. However, it was in the shade of the trees that Gator lurked. Gator was the name that we had given the strange man that routinely stared at us while we played. On numerous occasions, Gator would skulk about in the woods and work his way to the same big tree on the tree line. We always took note of his appearances, but we always kept our distance and ignored him. On one occasion, as we played home run derby, Gator popped up from behind the big tree, and he did more than just watch. He raised his arm and waved in such a way that made it clear that he wanted us to follow him into the woods. The creepy man was beckoning us to join him in the dark forest. Alarm bells sounded in my mind as the old warning of stranger danger blared in my head. I had already been deeply unsettled by the stranger's intrusions, but this time he took things a bridge too far. Something in me just knew that something was wrong. In my imagination, I saw a terrifying future unfold. I saw a future where Gator would lure us deep into the woods, and once we were far enough away from our homes, he'd strike. He would overpower us and tie us up to the trees and torture us. Once he had satiated his sadistic, torturous desires, he'd kill us. I vividly envisioned our possible fates. If we followed him, we might not have had a future. The three of us looked at each other, and without saying a word, we packed up our things and got out of there. For the rest of the day, we played right outside of Pasquale and Raoul's house. Their house was across from my house. Only a large field separated our homes. The field belonged to my family, and I crossed it frequently in order to spend time with my best buddies. Sometimes I'd walk, sometimes I'd ride my bike, and other times I'd drive our four-wheeler to get across the field. After a long day of playing outside with Pasquale and Raoul, I'd often head back home as the sun was setting or had already set. Those were the times when fear slithered over me like a horde of poisonous snakes. As the darkness crept in, so too did frightening and unwelcome thoughts. I couldn't help but imagine that Gator was out there in the long shadow of night. Was he watching and following me? I was alone, and he knew it. Would he pounce on me like a wolf and take advantage of the opportunity? These were the kinds of questions and thoughts that swam around my head like hungry sharks. The more I fed those thoughts, the worse and more intrusive they became. My heart raced as fear consumed me. Only the light shining from my house grounded me with the hope of reaching a place of safety. I picked up my pace and ran faster to reach home base more quickly. The fear didn't cease when I finally came to the apparent safety of my home. Night after night, Gator stalked my dreams. This disturbing man had turned my joyful days of summer into a time of anxious fearfulness, just as he had transformed my blissful dreams into nightmares. In these horrific dreams, he chased me through the woods. Desperately wanting to run, I was immobilized. My feet had been swallowed up by the forest floor. Then, after nature worked with Gator and conspired against me, he'd pounce. With a big, sharp knife in his hand, he smirked at me, and as the knife slit my throat, I awakened. A cold sweat covered my body. My bedsheets were soaked from my perspiration. The feeling of fear lingered with me and made it difficult for me to fall back asleep. Gator continued to haunt my dreams for years to come. Neither the bizarre sightings of Gator nor my nightmares kept me out of the woods. Pasquale, Raoul, and I wouldn't be deterred from having adventures in nature. The woods behind our houses were a place that we loved to explore. The canopy of leaves in the forest provided refreshing protection from the blistering sun. Something about the relative darkness of the woods seemed and felt magical. As 10-year-olds, the woods in our backyards were enchanted. Though the sun brightly shone in the clear blue sky, it couldn't penetrate the forest's leafy hide. Long, thick vines wrapped up around tree trunks like snakes. It was an exotic sight to the eyes of a child. Someone had cleared narrow paths in the woods, and we loved to follow them. Our curiosity and excitement grew as we walked along the paths. We wondered where the trails led. The deeper and deeper we went into the woods, the deeper was the thrill. There was a creek that flowed through those woods and emptied into a nearby pond. To us, that creek may as well have been a river. We'd take off our shoes and walk barefoot through the creek. The water was shallow and normally only reached a little above our ankles. The sensations of the semi-firm mud and slippery rocks on our naked feet delighted us. The water felt cool and refreshing against our skin. The three of us would spend hours searching for and catching crayfish and frogs. Those still are some of my fondest childhood memories. Simply being in those woods was, for us, like being in a tropical rainforest. It was truly like another world. Our imaginations were strong. As we played in those woods and lost track of time, we lost ourselves in our made-up world. We created scenarios where we imagined and battled enemies from our favorite cartoons and movies. Sometimes we'd fight the Foot Clan from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Sometimes we'd battle the evil forces of Cobra from G.I. Joe. And other times we'd battle Darth Vader and his stormtroopers. We created a complex world and played out various scenarios as though we were the heroes of a video game, defeating different levels. It was a type of virtual reality prior to virtual reality, and it was glorious. The perfect innocence of that summer wouldn't last. One day, as we played in and explored the woods, we followed a trail deeper than we had ever gone before. A sense of foreboding rose within us. We knew that we had probably ventured further than we should have. Several hut-like structures built out of twigs and small branches sat on the forest floor. It seemed odd. However, what we saw next was much odder. Deep in the woods, on the forest floor, someone had drawn a circle with a large hand inside of it. The whole thing had been painted red. At least, we hoped that it was red paint, because it looked an awful lot like blood. At the center of the circle was a tree stump that had been turned into what looked like an altar. On top of the altar sat a bizarre figurine. Someone had apparently used twigs to fashion what looked like a stick figure in the shape of a man. What made it even more bizarre was that someone had glued a pair of human teeth onto the thing's head. It was freaky. Pure terror erupted within us like a volcano. Without hesitation, we ran away. As we ran, we heard the sound of heavy footsteps. It wasn't the sound of a kid's footsteps. These were the unmistakable sound of an adult crashing through the woods. As I ran, I turned my head back to try and see who was behind us. My heart leapt into my throat when I saw that it was Gator. Although we had caught glimpses of Gator when we were in the woods before, this time was different. The previous times had only been glimpses from the corner of our eyes. All the other times, we hadn't really been sure that we had seen him at all. This time, however, there was no question about it. This wasn't the product of an overactive imagination or a trick of a frightened mind. Gator really was there, and he was chasing us. As I sprinted down the forest path, time seemed to slow. I could feel every beat of my heart, and I could see each leaf and branch from every tree around me. The look on the faces of Pasquale and Raoul captured the sheer terror that I felt. I'll never forget how their faces looked as we raced through the woods. It's a look that has been permanently etched into my brain. Finally, we crossed the tree line and exited the woods. We didn't stop running until we got to Pasquale and Raoul's house and went inside. Panting, exhausted, and filled with panic, we told their parents all about what had happened. Mrs. Valdez told us to wait inside while she took a look outside. She didn't see anything that day, but she didn't allow Pasquale and Raoul to play in those woods after that. Later, after hearing my description of Gator, my parents told me that his real name was Clyde Gaddiston. They went on to explain that he suffered from mental illness and that I was to keep my distance from him. I was also told not to be cruel and mock him. Other people from around town often picked on him and made fun of him. Knowing Gator's real name didn't bring me much comfort. He still haunted my nightmares, and he was the reason that we were no longer allowed to explore the woods. At that age, such a prohibition felt like a harsh prison sentence. It was a loss of freedom and the end of a once-in-a-lifetime childhood experience. I'm grateful for the way our parents lovingly raised us. The advent of so-called helicopter parents hadn't yet arrived. Our parents gave us freedom. They allowed us to be kids. We trusted them and they trusted us. Without that kind of parenting, we would have missed out on amazing childhood memories that can't be replicated by a smartphone or computer. Yet, our parents were always nearby to protect us. There's always some risk in life, and if you try to remove all potential risks, you'll soon find that you aren't really living. To this day, I'm thankful that we obeyed our parents' command of not going into those woods again. I'm also thankful that we didn't mock or taunt Gator when we saw him, because it eventually came out that he had a way of dealing with nasty children. 13 children had gone missing from 1988 to 1993. Of those 13 missing children, the remains of 8 of them had been found. The bones of the 8 children had been discovered buried in Gator's basement. A broken pipe had caused water to burst onto Gator's basement floor. The flooding forced him to call in a plumber. While working, the plumber came across a gruesome discovery. The bones had been unearthed by the water. Police officers came and, using dental records, they identified the victims. Each victim had been a missing child. I knew them from school. Gator lived with his elderly parents in a big house that was just down the street from mine. It turned out that when he was a kid, his parents used to chain him up like an animal in the basement. They verbally and physically abused him. They saw their son's mental illness as a curse. They believed that God had cursed him, and that as such, he was an evil devil that needed to be contained. When Gator's parents aged and became dependent upon their son, he took care of them. In taking care of them, he settled the score. Although his parents' memories may have faded, his memories had not. He vividly remembered the terror that he felt when he was chained up like a dog in that basement. Gator recalled how the darkness called out to him. At first, he resisted the sinister voices, but over time, he not only let them in, but he fully embraced them. The darkness told him that it was his God. Unlike his parents, it would never abandon him. It promised to be with him forever. All he had to do was trust his new God. This God that he found in that dank, dark basement taught him how to worship it. It commanded him to build stick figures of a man with a serpent's head. It told him how to create a powerful symbol. The symbol was to be a circle with a human handprint in the center, and it was to be painted in blood. At first, Gator's God instructed him to worship figures that represented it, but it wasn't long before it told him to kill and then eat the pets of neighbors. He killed the dog that his parents loved more than him. He skinned the furry family pet and served it as a roast for one Sunday dinner. Later, the dark voice demanded that he kill and then consume the flesh of all the children who laughed at him and teased him. After years of abuse and being tormented, he acquiesced to the macabre instructions. Little did his aged parents know that he had been serving them the flesh of naughty children. No longer would Gator be the victim. He became the predator. As a predator, he exacted the most severe revenge. The maliciousness of his deeds were so heinous that the police department had never seen anything like it before. The strange altar that we had discovered in the woods that hot summer day was his altar to his evil god. That was where he sacrificed animals as well as children. Gator had carved out paths in the woods that were like the spokes of a wheel, and the altar was at the center. Each path led to the sinister altar. It was almost as though he wanted it to be found. What would have happened if Gator had caught Pasquale, Raoul, and I that day? What would our fate have been if we mocked him when we saw him lurking from behind that tree? To this very day, I wonder about those questions. I suspect that if I had taunted him, then I wouldn't be here to tell this story. Had things been different, I could have been Gator's 14th victim. There is something else that I wonder about. What about the dark entity that Gator worshipped as a god? Was it a real spirit, or was it the sick and warped product of a twisted and tormented mind? If the entity is real, then it's possible that the story hasn't ended. Just because Gator has since died in prison, it doesn't mean that his god of darkness has died with him. Perhaps, even now, the evil spirit of darkness is calling out to another soul who has been imprisoned without light. Thanks for stopping by the Haunted Half Moon Inn. I hope that you have enjoyed your stay. Before you go, please put a wooden stake through the like button and leave a comment for the spirits to read. If you did enjoy your time with us, subscribe to this undead channel. Doing those little things really helps me to reach more souls. The world is sick and hurting. It needs more horror. Help me to heal the world through horror. Together, we can haunt this world one home at a time. And always remember, just because you don't see them doesn't mean that they aren't there.